How fit should underage GAA players be? I recorded a video on this before, looking at fitness test results from over 10 years of work in Connacht GAA. I still had a few questions around how they did some of the tests, how these are reported, what are the benefits of some that they did, and if they could go back again, what other tests would they do or they potentially look to introduce in the future. Lorcan Daly was the man behind the publication, so I got him on today to ask him all those questions that remained from the paper I'd read. We looked at some of the deeper meanings behind the numbers that were reported, what tests they could potentially introduce again in the future, and future plans they have for looking at similar tests across adult playing populations in senior, intermediate and junior club players. Reminder, if you want more information around how best to manage the fitness of your underage players in your local club, you get access to a free programme if you click the link in the description, and that'll be followed by a 5-day email course to educate you around how to use the programme and how best physically prepare the young players in your own GAA. Lorcan, in a previous podcast I used to do, I got you on to talk all about recovery, and you've had a few really interesting publications since around a Master's Rower. You obviously published a few bits smaller recovery stuff as well. You've jumped around a little bit in terms of jobs from Athlone, TUL and now back. But recently you published a paper I did a video on around fitness profiles of underage players. Do you want to tell us a bit more about how that came about?
Yeah, thanks a million, John. I really enjoyed the video, actually. You put it together really well, and the lads were very happy with that. So my supervisor is David Kelly here, who I work with, my former supervisor as I was doing the PhD. And then he had links with Connacht GAA, who was obviously with Cahill Craig over that. So they had the connection there, and then eventually we got talking to do a project. They had mountains of data essentially over very long periods, huge numbers of players. So then we set out to do some projects to analyse that and to use that, and then create the study that we did. And we may do more looking at different areas using that data set going forward as well, and other data sets we have through Connacht.
Yeah, because I got involved in development squads around, I think it was 2015, so it would have been around a similar time when this data would have started to be collected. It's when a lot of counties started putting together the fitness tests and stuff. So I know you might not necessarily have been involved at that stage, but even from talking to David and Cahill, why do you do fitness testing with underage players at that age? What are some of the main reasons behind it? But then what are some reasons that people might be like, oh, you shouldn't be testing young lads? Because I know from a couple of the clips I've put up, I've actually got a fair bit of hate through comments on TikTok. I'm like, a bit harsh here, you're completely misunderstanding some of this stuff. But let's lay out the reasons why this might actually be beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for a number of reasons, for the players themselves, it's beneficial to understand, maybe areas that they're stronger or weaker in, just to redirect any training they are doing, to understand, maybe where they could be, or so it'll help guide them in that regard. From the wider perspective, it's putting together data sets. It's given, more coaches an understanding. If we look at a few thousand players, what is maybe a good score in this or a bad score. But definitely what you're saying, you can over apply the numbers, that you're not exactly chasing number X, Y or Z. That's the main focus is, focus on the player themselves and just progressing them in general. So there's so many other factors going on, genetics and, other different things out of your control. So you don't necessarily have to aim to hit all the numbers or specific numbers. It's just maybe some guidance rather than a thing to really target, I would say.
Because I even wonder sometimes, is test the right word? Because test implies a pass or a fail, or we're judging, or we're scoring based on the result here, whereas ultimately their assessments are, it's probably more of a monitoring thing to see how much growth is there, at what ages is there the most growth, at what ages is there the most jumps. And we might not always necessarily change what we're doing in training to impact the results in some of the assessments or monitors that we're looking at. It's more just to monitor these changes and see what might actually be impacting them.
Yeah, I've never thought of the word of test like that, but definitely that's a great point. It's an entirely positive thing, a monitoring process, understanding where players are in a certain thing. Of course, obviously the game itself is so complex, so many factors. It's not like, if you get this yo-yo score, you're on the team. If you don't, you're not. It's just really putting some measurements out there, monitoring and giving some bits of direction. So definitely take the positives of it, but don't over apply, kind of like I said there.
In terms of the assessments that were done then, what are the main ones you looked at and why? I know you weren't necessarily there at the design stage, but still you probably have a good justification as to why anyway.
Yeah, the real thinking, I suppose, behind all the tests together is that these tests were measured or applied because all of the tests assessments would give an indication of team sport performance. So as I said, team sport performance, obviously, as we know, it's highly complex, many factors determining performance. So then you have to account for all these different factors. It's not just going to be just fitness or just speed. We want to get a range of attributes together. So obviously then we assess acceleration, longer distance sprint, aerobic endurance, body composition, jump power, a range of factors that are likely to influence the performance, and then just track them over time.
And just lay out some of the specific tests then.
So yeah, we had the Bangsbo Yo-Yo level 1, I think 5 and 20 meter sprint, broad jump, counter movement jump. What else then? A flexibility test, the sit and reach test. What else there? How do I have to just check? Muscular endurance, so that was push-up test, and then a height and body mass, and then a skin fold assessment to give derived body composition then.
I was both surprised and impressed you were able to get the skin fold one in there. I think because it was probably retrospective ethics. I'm thinking now if I was going to the ACTU ethics board looking for approval to do skin folds in under 18s, I don't think I'd even get to the door, never mind be thrown out the door. So I think it's one that's really useful if you can do it, but it has to be managed in a careful enough way, especially with under 18s.
Yeah, definitely. And there is, concerns of body image and different things, but I suppose at the end of the day, separate from that, it is going to be a factor that will influence performance, and especially for youth athletes, it gives us a good indication. Even as you mentioned there in the video, you can see that we'll say skin fold numbers don't massively change from under 14 all the way up, but what that lets you know is we're seeing body mass increase a lot, so that their fat-free mass is going up. So that gives us an indication maybe these athletes are putting on a lot of muscle or they're developing. So it gives good insight with that as well.
And do you think that how much that is? I know it's hard to pinpoint exactly, but how much that is down to just growth, and how much of it is down to partly playing the sport as well, and just the various damage on the body and regeneration and stuff, but also the S&C programs, the athletic development programs they might be doing, or is it kind of all encompassing of those, just guiding that growth or helping that growth?
I'd agree with you there. I think the vast majority almost certainly is just natural growth, but even profiling that is useful. But there is the extra influences, that these players would be doing some resistance training, other elements. So the training exposure is a part of it as well. So these were inter-county development squads, so there would be maybe you'd see a bigger increase on those fronts than other maybe club players who would be exposed to less strength and conditioning.
And while it would differ, I suppose a little bit from county to county, but also age group to age group. Do you like even anecdotal experience or second-hand knowledge? Was there any changes or developments in the S&C that might have been getting over those few years that could have impacted that? Based on, so obviously you're published 10 years worth of stuff, with Cahill or whoever, who sees these numbers as they're coming in. Do you know that the lads made many changes to what was being done based on it as they were coming in, or was it still purely a monitoring thing? There was a lot of other factors influencing what they might have been doing athletically.
Unfortunately, I've no idea what the exact plans were. I'd have to talk to Cahill with that, so I wouldn't be able to say anything related to the training. But yeah, I think from this study's end, it was just the monitoring process. So I don't think we could even be able to clearly write out that the vast majority of the group had done X, Y, or Z. But I wouldn't be able to tell you that, unfortunately, yet.
No, that's fair enough. And something I wondered about, and I don't know, were you able to see this in the data set you got? Were there any notable changes from, say if you look at a cohort from 2015, 16, 17 at 14 or 15 versus a cohort from 22, 23 at the same age. Did you notice any differences there, or could you even, like, did you have the years in the data set you got?
We did, and I've kind of half an answer for you. We did. I don't recall exactly looking at that in this data set. We have another similarly large data set in adult players, and we did look at that, and there was actually no difference. So, considering, I suppose, that that's the adults, and if there was, like, if training, I don't know, quality or what we were doing was massively improving, you would maybe see it more so in the adults, I would think. So if we didn't, because we didn't maybe see it in the adults, I would be inclined to think that there wouldn't be a massive difference in a, like, I don't know, 15, 16-year-old 10 years ago versus now. I'd say they would be more similar than different, would be my feeling, but we'd have to have a look through it.
Yeah, and there's probably more justifications around the younger players being more similar than different, because like you would think there have been developments in S&C over the years, and also because, say, like some of the players that would have been first test here are 25 now, so that's in theory 10 years of S&C built upon each other and hopefully getting better each time, whereas ultimately a 15-year-old is being tested, they can still only have max 2 or 3 years of stuff, and you also have, like, growth hasn't changed in the last 100 years, so a lot of those other factors are going to not constrain but keep things far more consistent to that age compared to what 25-year-olds would have been exposed to now versus 10 years ago.
Do you know what? I'll look at it. I'd say when we're done here and I can have an answer for you, you can put it in the notes. I'd say I'll just put the years and the different things, and we'll have a look, see if there's any trend. But yeah, that would be interesting. That's a great point. We'll have a look.
Yeah, I'm intrigued to find that out now. Some of the big things you really want to look at now are some of the practical implications. So based on some of the numbers you found, what do they mean? What do you derive from that? How can we use it to inform coaches, inform parents or the players themselves? And does it inform each of those groups in potentially different ways?
Yeah, I mean, probably from my personal end, I'm very tentative to use these concrete numbers. Okay, we're going to aim for this. I would keep them very broad, as in, that's a general guideline of what these players are here, but like really at the end of the day you're trying to think, well, what is going to maximize performance, and then try and maximize that. So for instance, you probably want to get players quicker. Okay, so you don't necessarily look at, well, this player here is at the 90th percentile, let's stop doing speed with him. So some things like that nearly always make you a better player. So I would just not change a huge amount, use it as a guide. If we were really behind, that we maybe, okay, if we're not doing much speed work, maybe, implement something there that might inform a little bit. But yeah, I'd keep it broad. Understand what are you really aiming for with your training and development. Another factor to consider, we'd probably mention here, is let's say, biological maturity, which we didn't account for in this study. But if your player is, an early or late maturing player, that's going to bring about differences there. So you're not exactly, we haven't measured it in this study, so we don't know, the exact context from that end. So you'd have to think about that too, I would say.
Yeah, that's good. We'll touch on that in a few minutes. When you get these results over time, like, are they being shared with the players and the parents, or are they kind of being gathered with? Like, is it being fed back in a way that's meaningful, or do you get numbers, or how much insights do you have on that?
I'm unfortunately not 100% sure how they feed it back to the groups or to the players or even parents. So I'd have to chat to the lads on that.
No, that's no hassle. Some of the real interesting bits I found were, and something I hadn't considered looking at, was around the speed momentum stuff you looked at. Do you want to just give us an explainer around what that is, how it works, and how it might potentially be meaningful?
Yeah, it's honestly not a thing you'd see in Gaelic or soccer so much. It's more of a rugby marker. So what momentum is your speed, running speed, multiplied by your body mass. So why I was interested to look at that specifically was that, for instance, we said the two of us maybe run at the same speed, 5 meters per second. But if athlete A is 10 kilos heavier, he's producing more power to go at the same speed. So it's when you consider the body weight as well as the speed, you can see if there is development occurring. So, for instance, putting it into the numbers there, we see maybe, they got 5% faster. But if you account for the massive increases in their body weight, their running power went up maybe by 40%. So similar story with the vertical jump. If you just look at your height, they might have got 4% more jump height. But because they're getting so much heavier, it means their muscle power is getting an awful lot bigger, if that makes sense. So both measures are useful. I would say just the outright speed and the outright jump height would be more important to understand for performance, because at the end of the day, during a match, they're carrying their own body weight, so it cancels out. But in terms of development and in terms of looking at, is the running power getting up better? Are their legs actually getting stronger over time? Accounting for the body weight would give it a bit of insight as well, I think.
Yeah, that's good, because you want to get faster or more powerful, or both. And you might be doing an awful lot of training to support that. But there may be situations where that's not happening. But if you're also monitoring weight, it helps apply a little bit of context as to why that power or speed isn't developing the same way, and it might be a useful way to feed back to the player. I can remember I was working with an adult team a few years ago, and at the start of every session we would have measured vertical jump height and weight, and one lad was like, all the other lads, their jump height is going up way more than mine. And I'm like, well, you said your main aim was to put on a bit of weight, and you've consistently put on like half a kg every single week, and your vertical jump height is staying the same, so you are getting more powerful. It's just in a heavier body. So it can help explain bits either to a player themselves who might be feeling a little bit frustrated themselves, but also potentially to like coaches who are like, how come he's not getting faster? I'm like, well, he's gotten way bigger, so he is getting more powerful. It's just not translating in the same way.
Definitely. And we're working on another study with adult data from Connacht as well. So Cahill is leading that at the moment, where we're comparing playing calibre. So we're looking at juniors, intermediate, seniors. So hopefully in a year or whatever that'll be, we'll have that out. But I was interested to look at the momentum for that as well. I suppose, like, if you were marking a player who's 100 kilos, whose top speed is 8 meters per second, versus another guy who's 65 kilos, who's 8 meters per second, they're the same speed. I'm thinking, well, it could be harder to mark the heavier guy who's at the same speed because he's more power, he's more, momentum. So it may be an interesting performance factor if you've guys at the same or different weight but the same speed. That could be a factor. I know, and obviously rugby, that's going to be a way bigger factor because it's way more contact. But I was thinking it could be something worth looking at. But definitely for these youth athletes who are, they're adding serious body mass in a year or two, I think tracking the two together gives good insight, exactly like the example there you're saying. Or even to reinforce them if they're not seeing improvements, but that they are getting better,
And even to kind of stick with the same point around the increases in mass they're getting, and I know we can't be definite which one is causing which, but are the increases in mass, say a lad goes up 4 centimetres his vertical jump but has put on 6 or 8 kg, is the 6 or 8 kg of muscle mass with some decent power training leading to that 4% jump, or is this a kind of a byproduct of trying to get stronger and more powerful? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's very hard, I suppose, to break. It's all going to be the big mix of the genetics, what they're eating, how the training as well. Their maturity. It's I suppose, very hard to take things apart. But using the two will give you good if the improvements are what you're looking for, or if they could be, let's say, going better maybe.
Yeah, some of the really interesting bits I found here were some of the positional differences. Do you want to take us through some of those?
Yeah, I'll just take a quick look. I suppose really what you might expect, we saw that the midfielders were fitter, taller across the board, a bit heavier as well, and similar story that the goalkeepers were a bit taller, a little bit heavier, and then less aerobically fit. Obviously, given the demands of being a goalkeeper, they don't need as high a level of aerobic fitness. I'm trying to think now, was there many other positional differences? Not massively. That was kind of the...
No, I found they were the biggest one. The goalies were taller, a little bit heavier and less fit, and midfielders were taller and aerobically fitter. or there weren't huge other bits outside of that.
The backs and forwards, just looking here, were fairly similar in terms of like aerobic fitness, other factors. But yeah, those are the biggest trends that we saw, that the size and the fitness of the midfielders and the goalkeepers versus the backs and forwards. It would be nice if we knew, maybe like full forward, half, like if we had them split that way. But for this, we just had forwards and backs and midfield.
Yeah, I get you, because you nearly see like sometimes the middle eight are nearly more of a similar profile to like the inside forwards and inside backs. But at the same time, a 15-year-old can be very fluid in the position they're playing in. Like they could be full forward for 2 games and then wing forward or midfield for 2 games. So it's like I even wondered it must have been really difficult at stages to specify which position someone was, because they could have been full back at under 14, 15 and then they're midfielder minor, like, and just even bits like that.
No, with that as well, like looking through the Excel there, so many of them were like, back slash forward slash midfield. So anyone who had more than one were not accounted for in the position. So we might have 1,000 players, but then within the positions there might only be 90 in each or something. Because so many of them, like you said, they'll do loads of jobs, but unless they specified I'm a back, forward, midfield, they weren't compared in terms of position. So that means there's a load of mixed players that weren't in that comparison, which would be interesting, of itself, I'd say.
Yeah, because it might be more of a hybrid profile. I think one of the important bits here as well, going out to coaches or parents or slash both, is like, if you're seeing a profile based off this of a midfielder or goalkeeper, it doesn't mean you should try and see a player in front of you who's a good centre forward and be like, oh, well, because they're tall and aerobically fit, we have to move them to midfield or any other position too somewhere based on what these profiles are saying. If they're good in a position, then they could be a bit of an outlier, maybe other things that are contributing to being good in a position. As we said, this is more like a monitoring thing than a saying, yeah.
No, definitely exactly as you said there, like it's a monitoring. We're literally like observing this stuff, like, here's a load of data on midfield. We're not saying this is a recommendation. We're not saying aim for this. It's just an observational study on this. So I would definitely take a leaf out of your book there and be a bit tentative, not aim for all these things. It's just provide some guidance would be the big thing.
Good, and we'll come back now to the biological maturity bit there. So this wasn't measured. So let's just say, first of all, if we were to look at monitoring that, how would you do it? And then second of all, what would be the potential insights we could get from that if we were to?
Yeah, like I haven't a huge amount of experience measuring it in the field or even doing much, we say, research or applying it. But I think it could definitely give you some insight. So like there's various methods to do it. The Camish roach, I think, is a common one. Basically, you ask the mother's height, father's height, get a prediction of how high they will be as an adult. There's a bit of a formula, but then you put that in and you see, okay, this guy is whatever 90% of his adult height, or this other guy is 98%, for instance, or whatever. So the take home for that is if player A is only 85% of where they should be, they have a lot more growth to come. Player B maybe is 98% there. That player mightn't experience as big an increase. So for us and our obviously a huge data set that we see, okay, there is a sharper increases from under 14, 15, 16, and then it levels off a bit because most players are maturing at that time. But having individual level knowledge, you'd know, okay, we're at the higher end or we're at the lower end, we can expect a big spurt here, and that could shape where they may be on the scale. So for instance, 1 year they might be in the bottom 30% for strength or power, and then they'd have the growth spurt, and then the next following year they might be up into the top 30%.
Yeah, and even it might be interesting to track how, like, as they go through that growth spurt, how it impacts other bits, like height will obviously, that's always something that's going to have the biggest impact by growth, stating the obvious there. But like strength might move with it quite quickly, but because the coordination aspect, speed might be a bit slower to catch up, and it might take like 3 rounds of measurements, say 18 months to see the speed improvements, but you might see the height in 1 round and the strength in 2, and just, stuff like that might be interesting. See, okay, well, they've just gone through a growth spurt. They might be faster really quickly after it, or it might take a good bit of time for them to catch up, just to understand around the patience required for coaches to help players through those periods. And any other bits and obviously, like, you have to take into account the time demands of the testing and the manpower and everything, but are there other bits, if you could go back, you would look to maybe measure and find a little bit more about?
Yeah, I suppose, yeah, as you said, if we'd no time constraints, probably do more tests. But it would all depend. Maybe even something like a change of direction test. An acceleration or a deceleration, or what else? I think even you mentioned there in the video having force plates, you get maybe more insight. I think a big one would be some kind of strength test. So we had, the push-ups. How many push-ups can you do? We had the jumps. But I think a strength outcome would be good, whether it's an isometric squat or even some kind of strength test. I think that would give some insight. And what else? Including the biological measures would be nice, just to give more context to that data. Obviously, we can look at the few years and say, yeah, they were mature in here, but that's going to be some bit of noise because some guys are later or earlier. So those would be some pieces. What else? If we've done limited time and resources, contextualize it a bit. Look, see, does any increases in these outcomes result in maybe improvements in performance or progression to further levels, or even expanding on the stuff we did for my own PhD, looking at, okay, we've all these physical outcomes, do they relate to match performance in terms of GPS or even coaches assessment, or even tackle counts? Do the fitter guys or girl players undertake more tackles, or do they have more possessions? Or so putting a bit of context on that data, I think, would be very good. And even understanding what's the most important for performance. That's the big thing, I suppose. And obviously it's a complex thing to measure performance, but we have flexibility there, and then we've also speed. If you just look at the paper, they're all of equal importance. But if I was really a coach, I'd probably focus a good bit more on speed if they had a fair enough level of flexibility, for instance. Or maybe some things are more important or less important, and that could guide what we'd be doing.
Okay, good man. There's loads to jump into there. I'm going to go back to the very first bit around looking at strength. So, like, because of the context it's in, why wasn't strength included? I'll let you, look at the factors that contribute to it, and then how you could do it in a realistic way. And you've touched on that already.
Yeah, I think, if you can just imagine a load of under 15s looking at you there, you wouldn't like to be doing a 3-rep max squat, or some of them mightn't be able to squat, or any strength test, I'd say, would be a logistical nightmare there. So, but now with, even as you said there, the force plates, you could have isometric squat. It's fairly low impact, low fatigue. You could belt out 30 of them there, standardize 90-degree knee bend, and that'll give you a nice strength assessment. So from some overview, that you'd expect that strength would go up a little bit more than the like a running speed, or those things are hard to move the needle on. So that might give us more insight.
Yeah, even just the thoughts of a bunch of 15-year-olds going bench press, you're like, these are prime age to do something silly, and get stuck under it by being way too ambitious, and someone getting distracted that's meant to be spotting them and looking over at something else in the corner. So it's not so much that in theory it's not appropriate to test strength, but in a practical way it's not really appropriate to test strength. I know I was actually chatting to a lad who was doing some testing in a local school here, very successful school, and he was an isometric mid-thigh pull, and he said the farmers were way stronger than the town lads, will say. Not so much they were actually stronger, it's just their grip strength was so much stronger, so it was easier to hold onto the bar for longer with more force to their legs, whereas the lads of town, completely generalising stereotyping here, but it's just, even though they might have had the power in their legs, they weren't able to hold onto the bar for as long to get an accurate number there. So I even find stuff like that intriguing around the context around why you get some measures and scores and stuff. And Were there then, I assume like they did come in, some strength tests at like mine or under 20, but it's very hard to add them in then to your data set or in how you report that data set.
Yeah, I'm not sure have they evolved much with the testing, or what they're doing. They're obviously they're like, this was published. They're still, the wheel is still turning. There's more data coming in. I don't know, have they? I think they've kept those core tests though, to be honest. And I'm not actually sure, are they doing that yet, but I'd have to chat to Cahill and see exactly.
To move on into the point you brought up, and like I'm mad to jump into this now, like looking at performance in general and how they impact each other. So even some of your PhD stuff, you looked at like KPI, not contributors too, but say KPIs of performance. What are some of those you could potentially look at to maybe give us a bit more insight and start looking at some kind of correlation or modelling stuff that we could maybe tease things out? And you can give us like some numbers here, but also anecdotal stuff you've picked up on through your experience of monitoring this stuff and lecturing in it.
Yeah, I think the more I'm looking at it, the more I'm like, it's any number is nearly dangerous. It's nearly like for performance. I think things like, looking at elite players versus sub elite. Why I say any numbers are dangerous. Like we'll say I could make 10 tackles in a game. You might make 40, but if I made 10 like goal saving, really important, really challenging tackles, you might have 4 times as many, but they might be, not have made any impact. So in theory, you could have lower numbers, but the performance is different. So things like looking at elite or sub-elite, or even what we're trying to develop here now is maybe just ask the coaches, like you have a team of 3 coaches, you have a squad of 40 players, maybe rate the players 1 to 10. If you said overall performance, if all the 3 coaches were very consistent and reliable, we'd know that, well, like, this player here has 9 out of 10 for all 3, this guy here has 4 out of 10. Then if we could run other tests, we might see what correlates with performance. So I think you have to have a subjective a component. I think, if you look at GPS, I mean, there's a study there in the Premier League, and I think they looked at, like, we'll say the top to bottom Premier League, and the GPS data was almost very similar across them all. There was a little bit more in terms of very high speed sprinting, but that's probably because the very top teams are just faster, so they're over the threshold. But it's a bit of a mess looking at all the numbers. Definitely as sports scientists, we like numbers and you can control X and Y, but for team sport, there's so many factors. It's hard to do. You nearly have to go with that, like elite, sub-elite, what's different, or something else like that.
Yeah, I remember seeing this, it wasn't a study, but like numbers put out around the World Cup in 2018, and just in the group stages, they ranked the teams in order of either total distance covered or average distance covered per player per match. And then they highlighted the teams that made like the quarterfinals, the 8 of them, and they're just completely spread through. There was no order or like clustering together of them anywhere. So it just shows like distance covered is just that, distance covered. It might mean something for some players, but absolutely nothing for others. That's interesting about your subjective point. I've often wondered about that as well, because like you're saying, you're looking at senior, intermediate, junior clubs. I have an FYP student I'm supervising at the minute who's looking to see, are there difference in physical parameters similar to the ones we've outlined here today within the same club between the junior players and the senior players. And he just has to rely on the senior manager to say, oh, they're our first 15 or our first 17, they're the lads who aren't really in contention. Or we're just going to like very crudely group them like that and see is there a difference. But like your number 17, your number 18 could be like really similar or vastly different, but are ranked 17, 18 because of other contributors to performance like game intelligence, shot accuracy. Number 22 could actually be a really good free taker and brutal at everything else, but you carry him because he's a good free taker and that bumps his performance up. So yeah, stuff like that does need to be taken into account when you say, okay, what does contribute to performance? But at the same time, it does look more and more likely that speed and power are really important. And even looking at your thing there, aerobic capacity is really important, particularly for midfielders or middle A players. But then that is often like to a point.
But that's it. Like at the end of the day, when you really boil it down, as you said there, it's going to be a coach is deciding. We're going to, if you're comparing starters versus non-starters, it's a coach's decision at the end of it. So the coach is ultimately deciding the performance level of any player in any context. So anything where you're comparing an international to national or whatever, it's been a coach somewhere is like, oh, this player will move forward or this one won't. And they're the judges of putting all these pieces together.
I remember seeing or hearing some of the stuff by Ross Tucker and the Science Sport podcast and all like that. But he said like, I think it was testosterone levels in sprinters and all, that if you look at like today 8 on the start line for the 100 metres final, testosterone won't predict who's going to win. Or if you rank the players in the NBA in terms of height, it's not like the best player is the tallest and the shortest player is the smallest. But if you select them out of the normal population, testosterone is going to be a big contributor to speed. Height is going to be a big contributor to basketball. But once you've taken out all the tall people, height doesn't make as much of a difference. Same as in your group, if you've like 30 midfielders in front of you, you pick out the tallest lads who are really fit, and you pick out the 10 tallest who are also maybe the fittest or close to that. That no longer becomes a predictor. Now it's around their timing under kick out, their support play, their communication, their tackling, their discipline. They all become way bigger factors once you've pulled them out of, say you go into like a group of transition years, and you'll probably pick out like the lads who are middle in Gaelic football by their height and their fitness, to a point. But after that, it's loads of other things that actually factor in who's good and who isn't.
It's a bit like having a 1,000-piece jigsaw and picking out 3 pieces, speed and strength, and saying, can we predict the whole picture? Well, no, because there's so many things. So the more outcomes you can measure, the better picture you'll paint, I think. That seems to be it.
Yeah, good. Stuff I played around with this myself before, looking at GPS with like, even just trying to get some of the stuff off the performance analysis lads, and even just distance covered and actions. Just any action they measured, I put it on one axis and distance covered on the other. And all it showed me was like who's busy. It doesn't really show me who's impacting the game. It's like some lads covered a lot of distance and had a load of game actions. But it's not necessarily that they're all, like someone else could have had way less actions, way less distance, but could have been 1-3, where someone else just did a lot but they didn't have, like you were saying, your 10 tackles versus my 40. It's the importance of those or the impact they have in the game. And I was trying to work out this player efficiency rating, but no, I didn't get enough from it anyway. You were saying about the next steps. You're going to look at this in senior, looking at more stuff around the underage players. Without what you can tell us, give us some information there.
Yeah, so as I said, Cahill is leading the next one, comparing junior, intermediate, senior. Without, I suppose, going into massive detail, we're finishing it up. Like in general, it is what you'd expect, that speed goes up in a nearly linear way. That we have the senior guys are the best, intermediate second best, junior third. Probably the big take home from it, we see that trend across outcomes, and we see maybe that the speed and the yo-yo or the fitness test there, maybe a key differentiator. But probably the massive thing is that there's an enormous overlap. It's not like a night and day increase from junior to intermediate to senior. There's massive overlap, and that overlap is because of what we're saying, because there's so many other factors to performance. We're only measuring 3 pieces of the thing, or 4, whatever it is. But yes, that we do see that speed is better on average, but you have so many guys who are way faster than the senior average and way slower. There's more of a mix. And as well, there's so many factors at play, and we're looking at, is there starters or non-starters, etc., etc. And yeah, the trends are a little bit similar. You have, the midfielders are a bit taller, a bit fitter, and it's more or less the similar trends in some regards, yeah.
Yeah, because I suppose you will have like the outliers of like, there's always one lad on a junior team who's unbelievably fit, and it makes him an effective junior because his hurling or football might not be that strong. He would completely lose that effectiveness if he went up to intermediate or senior. Or like, say for example, like I would have played a bit of senior club, but as I came down through the ranks, I was never remotely standout as I came down, because I depended on all the training to keep me at that level. Where you see some lads who are like a good senior, they come down to intermediate with like almost minus fitness, but they're an unbelievable intermediate because their hurling or the football is just so good and stands them out for everyone. And because the pace of the game around them has dropped a bit, their lack of fitness doesn't limit them as much as it used to. And the other bits you've gone on, so I know you've done some interesting stuff in the past around like recovery and like that stuff on the. That was your granddad, the Masters rower, wasn't it?
Yeah, so he started that, so that's how I got into that random piece. But yeah, no, I've a few things just trying to finish out, I suppose, in review and different things. I've would say more coming with the master rowers. I have a PhD student, Alfonso. He's working on that. In terms of team sport, we've one study there looking at what we were mentioning, the validity and reliability of coaches' assessments. So that involved a global survey asking, PhD qualifications, would this be a useful insight? And honestly, it was like 94% plus were like, it's an essential component of measuring performance in team sport, which is interesting. And in terms of the reliability, it seems like from the bits we have that coaches are consistent, that the three backroom team coaches will rate, this player as a high level, low, medium, whatever, we'll say relative to the team average. So that tells us why we went with the coaches, is that they know the players, they know what their roles in a team are, and are they able to do it or not, and they can judge their capacity across all the factors. But yeah, so they're kind of juggling a few bits, but just need to finish them out, and then we'll have maybe a clearer plate then from then.
That's an interesting point as well, because I think back to, like say from reading Moneyball, I think of some of the meetings there that Billy Bean is leading, and most of the scouts would have rated the same players as high, because like sometimes it's eye-catching things as well, like a more athletic looking player, like if a player comes out and looks fit and is a bit leaner and the jersey's fitting them well and even kick one ball well, straight away your mind's like, oh, they're a good player. And someone else might come out and maybe not look as fit, maybe not look as athletic, but if you take a couple of steps back in the more important games, they might actually impact the game in a really important way too. So it can be really hard to, I suppose, manage your own biases around that as well, can't it?
I mean, it's like, of course, you could tear it to shreds and say this is the bias. This is, you mightn't like this player or whatever, but there's nothing else. Even like if you're just relying on GPS or something, you're completely blind. So at least this is some kind of a thing. Obviously in other sports like a marathon, you've got your marathon time, and that's the performance. It's concrete. You wouldn't just rely on, well, my lactate threshold is this. Well, what's your marathon? That's the gold. That's the performance. Whereas in team sport, we don't have that. So you'll have to make some sacrifice, because you can't have a concrete number. So yeah, it'd be nice to include that in other studies just as an additional measure. Like, do these things relate to performance or other outcomes? But yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting though, still how it'll impact things. Plus, like baseball it is a far more measurable sport than the majority of others.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just you've got specific metrics probably, and yeah.
Yeah, great stuff. So we'll wrap it up then with I think I said to you beforehand, one thing that's overrated, one thing that's underrated related to sports science, coaching, S&C, anything you want. And you can go in either order, or you can go in whichever order you like, over or under first.
Yeah, I don't know, is this a fair assessment at all? I was trying to think there, what could we say? Underrated, probably just harder to say, but maybe carbohydrates. It just from, probably in youth athletes, probably in, if you just look at team sport athletes. I know Kieran O'Connor here looked at adult players. They're not taking on board enough carbohydrates. So it seems like maybe it is underrated, maybe around the game days. It seems like then on the flip side, you're working with a team, they're all about maybe gels just 5 minutes before the thing, but then whereas the real fueling is done a day or two beforehand in terms of your glycogen. So it seems like there's a bit of a mismatch there maybe, and probably so for youth athletes playing with 4 different teams, training every day, you'd imagine that they're going to have substantial carbohydrate needs. So that seems to be a thing maybe to put a bit more weight behind in team sport.
Great point. Completely agree. Yeah, good man. Overrated then.
I was thinking in some ways stretching. I'm not saying I disagree with stretching, but I think maybe there's an overemphasis on, if you're spending, like, if I'm thinking of, okay, I have a team here, we've an hour or whatever, and if we're doing 20 minutes of stretching, you'd be so much better served maybe even just 20 more minutes of small-sided game, or 10 minutes of speed work, 10 minutes of conditioning or something. There's a lot more bang for buck if you're using substantial time on stretching. It could be just literally subbed in for something better, I would say.
I think I need to be really careful here, because everyone I've got on the last few weeks is just completely agreeing with all my biases and thoughts as well. So, colleague of yours, Keno D, came on with 2 weeks. I'm not sure which order these will go out in, but he came on and completely agreed with everything he said. And it's just like I'm finding people now, they'll all agree with stuff I say. So, no, I'm completely with you. I think, it's not that stretching is bad, it's just there's far more useful things you could do with time spent as a group.
I mean, I'm not saying, absolutely. I'm just thinking of, you could incorporate stretches to a bit of a warm up, bit of a cool down. But at the end of the day, if you're going overboard with it, which maybe some teams are, there could be it's not a case that it's all positive, but there's something that could be way more positive. Or, resistance training, for instance, if you're doing maybe a nice full range of motion, that's going to improve your mobility as much as stretching we now see, but you're also going to get stronger, more powerful, and all the other things. So again, time is limited, definitely in these youth athletes doing a million things all at once. So you can be critical of the time and be like, could this be a better use of the time? So yeah.
Yeah, no, you're bang on with that. Where, if anyone has any follow-up questions or wants to get more insights or find out about more of your studies, where can they find you?
Probably use LinkedIn now more than anything. So I don't even know. I suppose you just look up Lorcan Daly TUS and I'd come up. Actually, don't know if I thing. But my email also is lorcan.daly@tus.ie. That could be, if they have specific questions, they could email me anytime. Or go on to LinkedIn, they'll see the stuff we're doing and they can message me there if they want it.
Excellent, Lorcan. Thank you very much for that, and I'm sure we'll have you on again at some stage to discuss more the bits you have in motion at the minute.
No worries. Thanks a million, John. Great to chat to you again.